Most people think the Social Security decision is about one thing: take less money now or more money later. That is how the calculators present it. That is how most cocktail party advice presents it. That is how too many advisors present it. And if you isolate the question that way, waiting often wins on paper. The monthly check is larger. The break-even charts look persuasive. The delayed filer gets to feel disciplined and sophisticated, but I have never trusted a retirement decision that is judged in isolation, because retirement is not a line item game. It is a pressure system. That is the mother line of this story. Social Security is not a standalone prize for patience. It is a pressure valve inside your retirement machine. And the right filing age is not determined by some generic chart that assumes your life, your taxes, your portfolio, your spouse, your health, your inheritance goals, and your risk tolerance all fit neatly inside one average American story. They do not. That is why I want to say something that some people will misunderstand on purpose. Waiting until 70 is often smart, but not always. And when it is not, filing at 62 is not a sign of panic. It can be one of the most rational moves in the whole plan. I know that sounds almost impolite in a world where delayed claiming has become a kind of financial morality play. The patient person is wise. The early filer must be desperate, unsophisticated, short-sighted, or scared. I do not think that way. I think like an allocator. I want to know what the decision does to the whole household system, not just the monthly check, because once you view Social Security as a pressure valve, the entire conversation changes. A pressure valve does not exist to look impressive. It exists to stop the machine from bursting in the wrong place. That is exactly what early claiming can do in the right case. The first mechanism is what I call the lifespan clock. Most break. Even analyses pretend $1 at 95 is emotionally equivalent to $1 at 62. That is mathematically tidy and humanly absurd. A person with a chronic condition does not live inside the same time horizon as a person from a family of marathon survivors. A person whose parents both died in their early 70s should not let a spreadsheet shame him into waiting for a break. Even age he may never touch. A person whose best years of mobility, energy, travel, and enjoyment are now should not be casually told to delay 8 years, as though those 8 years are financially neutral. They are not. Time in retirement is not generic time. Early retirement years are higher quality years for many people. Those are the years when health is often better, movement is easier, and discretionary experiences are still realistic instead of theoretical. I have seen too many people spend their 60s protecting a larger check in their 70s and 80s without ever honestly asking what kind of life they are trading away in the process. That is bad planning disguised as discipline. If your health is compromised, if longevity is weak in your family, or if you simply have a very grounded reason to think the long break, even path is unrealistic, then the lifespan clock matters more than the abstract math. The question is not whether waiting produces more if you live deep into old age. Of course it can. The question is whether your personal clock makes that trade intelligent. And if the answer is no, then taking the money earlier is not emotional weakness. It is timeline honesty. The second mechanism is what I call the market shock valve. This is one of the most important and most underappreciated reasons to claim at 62. If you retire into a falling market, every dollar you pull from your portfolio in those early years carries more damage than it seems to. A market decline in the first years of retirement is not merely unpleasant. It is dangerous because withdrawals from depressed assets reduce the capital base that would otherwise participate in the recovery. That is sequence risk. And sequence risk is one of the few retirement risks that can quietly ruin a sound-looking plan before anyone realizes what happened. Imagine a couple needing $12,000 a month to live. If all of that is coming from an IRA or brokerage account during a bad market, they are not simply using their investments. They are liquidating pieces of a weakened machine. Every distribution is coming out of a lower balance. Every sale is locking in more damage. Every month that goes by without another income source increases the amount of healing the portfolio must later do just to return to the same place. This is why I say Social Security can act like a pressure valve. If one spouse files at 62 and begins bringing in a monthly benefit, that is not just income. That is reduced pressure on the portfolio. That is several $1,000s per month that no longer needs to be pulled from a declining account. That is more shares left intact, more time for recovery. More flexibility in bad years, more breathing room in the exact window where breathing room matters most. People who obsess over maximizing the check at 70 often ignore this because the market risk piece is harder to dramatize than the simple monthly comparison. But a household that avoids 8 years of excessive withdrawals in a fragile market may come out far wealthier in practice than a household that delayed perfectly on paper but bled the portfolio on the way there. That is the point. Retirement planning is not won by optimizing one line if another line is bursting. The third mechanism is what I call the spousal bridge. This is where the Social Security conversation becomes much more sophisticated for married couples and much less suited to one-size-fits-all advice. When one spouse earns significantly more than the other, the best answer is often not both claiming early and not both waiting late. Sometimes the best answer is coordination. The lower earning spouse claims earlier, the higher earning spouse delays. That creates a bridge. The bridge works because it brings money into the household while still allowing the larger benefit to grow. It reduces dependence on taxable IRA withdrawals. It preserves more portfolio capital in the meantime. And most important of all, it strengthens the survivor benefit later because the higher earner's delayed benefit becomes the safety net for the surviving spouse. That matters tremendously. A lot of people still think of Social Security as my check and your check. That is amateur thinking inside a marriage. A serious couple thinks of Social Security as a household income system with survivor consequences. The higher earner delaying is not just protecting himself, he is building the floor the surviving spouse may stand on later. And yet the lower earner claiming earlier can still be exactly the right move if that smaller check reduces current portfolio strain, current taxation, and current sequence risk. That is the spousal bridge. It is not glamorous, it does not fit inside a bumper sticker, but for many couples it is one of the smartest uses of the system. You get current cash flow, you preserve the larger delayed benefit, you give the household room, you improve the survivor structure. That is elegant planning. Now let me speak more bluntly about what happens if both spouses wait in a household that is already drawing heavily from tax-deferred accounts. A lot of people call that discipline. Sometimes it is simply expensive pride. If the couple is withdrawing $140,000 or more annually from IRAs while waiting for larger checks, those withdrawals are not just funding life. They are stacking taxable income, increasing exposure to higher brackets, and forcing larger drawdowns from the investment base. In a smooth market, maybe that remains manageable. In a rough market, it can become a self-inflicted wound. That is why I care more about after-tax household cash flow design than about ideological purity around delayed claiming. The fourth mechanism is what I call the trust fund discount. Now, I want to be careful here because I do not enjoy scaring people into bad decisions. Social Security panic is one of the Internet's favorite businesses, but pretending the issue does not exist is also childish. If the trust fund is projected to be depleted on a certain timetable, and if future benefits may be payable only to the extent ongoing tax revenue supports them, then a rational planner at least has to acknowledge the discount. Not certainty, not hysteria, a discount. What do I mean by that? I mean that future promised benefits may deserve a haircut in your internal planning model if you are the sort of person who values certainty more than legislative hope. Congress may act, benefits may be preserved fully, a fix may arrive, fine, but if your plan treats that outcome as guaranteed, you are making a political bet whether you admit it or not. Some people are comfortable with that, others are not. If you are 62 today and the horizon for trust fund stress arrives before or around the years when your maximum delayed benefit would fully kick in, then the future larger check is not a pure certainty. It is a projected larger check. Again, perhaps it materializes exactly as hoped, but if your temperament prefers known income now over hoped, for income later inside a politically uncertain system, then early filing has a real logic. This is especially true for people who do not need the money to survive, but do care about converting uncertainty into reality. Many high earners claiming earlier are not doing it because they are broke. They are doing it because they are making an institutional risk decision. They would rather collect a smaller guaranteed stream now than delay into a bigger future promise. They no longer treat as perfectly safe. That is not irrational. That is how allocators think. The fifth mechanism is what I call the tax swap. This is where the real math gets interesting. A lot of retirees fund their early retirement years primarily from traditional IRAs or 401ks. Every dollar out of those accounts is ordinary income, fully taxable, no mercy, no subtlety. The money lands on the return like wages without the employer. Social Security behaves differently. At worst, only 85% of the benefit is taxable. Often in the earlier years, depending on the income mix, less than that becomes taxable, which means that replacing a slice of IRA withdrawals with Social Security can improve the household's effective tax position, even if the gross income picture looks similar. That is the tax swap. You are trading fully taxable dollars for partially taxable dollars. And if you are thoughtful, that can create more room in the brackets for other planning moves. Most importantly, it can create room for Roth conversions. This is where many people miss the genius of early filing. They focus only on the Social Security choice and miss the planning chain reaction. If taking a smaller benefit earlier reduces the need for heavy IRA withdrawals, then more of the remaining bracket space may be used intentionally for Roth conversion instead of being consumed accidentally by living expenses. That can be a major improvement over time. The years between retirement and required minimum distributions are often the golden years for tax planning. If Social Security at 62 helps structure those years more intelligently, then the benefit is not just the check itself. The benefit is the tax freedom it helps buy elsewhere in the system. That is a very different way of thinking, and it is the correct way. The sixth mechanism is what I call the pressure test principle. This is where I separate serious planning from lazy maxims. Any retirement decision should be pressure, tested against multiple future states. What happens if the market is flat? What happens if it drops? What happens if one spouse dies early? What happens if Medicare premiums rise because income stacked poorly? What happens if required distributions later are larger than expected? What happens if taxes rise? What happens if legislative promises weaken? What happens if health changes faster than hoped? The advisor who says always wait is skipping the pressure test. The person who says always file early is also skipping the pressure test. I am interested only in answers that survive pressure, and filing at 62 can survive that pressure more often than the financial culture likes to admit. Now, none of this means I am dismissing the power of delayed claiming. I am not a higher guaranteed benefit later can be enormously valuable. It can act like longevity insurance. It can protect the surviving spouse. It can make late life income sturdier. It can outperform in long-lived households. I understand all of that. But understanding one truth does not give you permission to ignore the others. That is why I dislike the way this conversation is often framed. Waiting until 70 is treated like the intelligent default. Maybe, but only after you have priced health, market risk, taxation, spousal coordination, trust, fund risk, and the interaction with the rest of the portfolio. And that is exactly what most people never do. They treat Social Security like an isolated consumer decision. They ask, do I want a smaller check now or a bigger one later? That is kindergarten. The real question is, what filing age produces the strongest whole household outcome after portfolio withdrawals, taxes, survivor needs, Medicare thresholds, market sequence, and future uncertainty are all included? That is the only question worth serious attention. The seventh mechanism is what I call the earnings test reality. If you are still working meaningfully at 62, early filing becomes a different analysis because benefits can be temporarily reduced under the earnings test. This matters because a person earning more than the threshold may think he is smartly starting benefits when in reality he is complicating the system for no near-term gain. So I do not tell working people casually to file at 62. I tell them to look at the full picture. If meaningful earned income still exists, the early filing case weakens, unless other factors are unusually strong. This is why I keep coming back to the same sentence. Context decides, not ideology, not slogans, not internet conviction. Context, the eighth mechanism, is what I call the survivor floor. This is especially important for couples and often underappreciated by the spouse who earned less. The larger delayed benefit is not only about lifetime optimization for the higher earner. It is about what remains after one person dies. One check disappears. The surviving spouse keeps the larger benefit. So the household that coordinates claims intelligently is not merely maximizing today. S-flow, it is also shaping tomorrow. S-floor. That is why the lower spouse early, higher spouse late pattern can be so powerful. It creates current relief without sacrificing the late life protection that comes from the bigger check surviving. I have seen too many households focus so hard on break, even charts that they forget widowhood changes everything, the tax brackets change, the filing status changes, the emotional margin changes. The household often becomes financially harsher at the exact moment life becomes emotionally harsher. A stronger survivor floor is not a detail, it is a core design feature. The ninth mechanism is what I call the freedom premium. A lot of people think Social Security should be maximized in pure mathematical terms. I care about another form of maximization too. Freedom. What gives the household more freedom in the first decade of retirement? What reduces the need to sell assets in bad markets? What reduces the need to pull large, fully taxable IRA distributions? What gives the couple more breathing room for travel, caregiving, health surprises, and portfolio recovery? What allows one spouse to sleep better if the other is more fragile? That freedom has value even when it does not show up cleanly on a break-even chart. And that value is often bought by getting some money flowing earlier instead of forcing the entire retirement bridge to be carried by the portfolio alone. This is why I never laugh at a retiree who files at 62 after thoughtful analysis. Sometimes that early check is not a concession. It is a release of pressure, a release of tax pressure, a release of portfolio pressure, a release of uncertainty, a release of survivor risk, a release of sequence risk. Pressure release is not sexy, it is just useful. And useful wins more retirements than elegant theory ever will. The 10th mechanism is what I call the anti-slogan rule. Whenever anyone tells you, always wait or always claim early, ask them what they did with health, portfolio withdrawals, spouse dynamics, survivor income, IRMAA, tax character, required distributions, trust, fund uncertainty, and market sequence. If they cannot answer that, you are not getting planning. You are getting a catchphrase. I am not interested in catchphrases. I am interested in durable outcomes. That is why, after working with many retirees and seeing many households that looked similar on the surface but were nothing alike once the full plan was modeled, I have come to the same conclusion over and over. Social Security timing is not a benefit question. It is a systems question. If the system is strengthened by waiting, then wait. If the system is strengthened by filing at 62, then file. And do not apologize to people who only know how to compare two numbers on a chart, because the chart is not your retirement. Your retirement is the whole machine, and the whole machine is what matters. There is another layer here that almost nobody explains properly, and it matters more than most retirees realize. The 11th mechanism is what I call the widow squeeze. A married couple can live for years inside a tax structure that feels manageable. Then one spouse dies and the survivor suddenly finds herself living on a single filing status with a very different bracket map. The household income may fall, yes, but not always as much as people expect. One Social Security check disappears, the larger one remains. IRA withdrawals may still be needed, investment income may still exist, and yet the tax brackets become less generous. That is one of the cruelest transitions in retirement, because the emotional loss and the tax loss can arrive together. This is exactly why the higher earner delaying can matter so much. The larger benefit does not just increase a monthly number, it strengthens the survivor floor inside a harsher future tax environment, but it is also why the lower earner claiming earlier can still make sense. While both spouses are alive, the household may need the bridge now and the stronger survivor benefit later. Both truths can live together in one intelligent plan. That is what shallow advisors miss. They keep trying to crown one filing age as morally superior when the real job is to design a system that works in more than one life stage. Good retirement planning is not only about the years when both spouses are healthy and present. It must also survive the years when one person is gone, filing status changed, and the tax code becomes less forgiving at the exact moment life becomes less forgiving. There is also the 12th mechanism, which I call the Roth runway link. A lot of people do not realize that early filing can sometimes make a Roth strategy easier to execute, not harder. That sounds strange at first because Social Security adds income. But remember, not every dollar of Social Security is taxed the same way as every dollar from an IRA. If a lower earning spouse files at 62, and that income allows the couple to reduce heavy IRA withdrawals, the net result can be a cleaner tax picture than people expect. Instead of funding life almost entirely with fully taxable IRA money, the household starts mixing in partially taxable Social Security money. That can create a better sequencing environment for partial Roth conversions in the years before required minimum distributions become unavoidable. In other words, the Social Security valve can sometimes improve the tax planning runway rather than destroy it. Again, context decides. Not every household gets this result. But the households that do are exactly the households that would be hurt most by one size fits. All slogans, the right analysis asks, what income source is replacing how much of each source is actually taxable, what bracket space remains, and how does this affect the next 10 years instead of only this month. That is why I insist on seeing the whole machine. Because once you do, the Social Security decision stops looking like a simple race toward the highest monthly check and starts looking like a coordinated cash flow tax and survivor. Benefit design problem, that is a much harder problem. It is also the only one worth solving. So here is where I leave you. If you are healthy, wealthy, tax, flexible, lightly exposed to sequence risk and protecting a strong survivor case through delay, then waiting may still be the right answer. If your health is fragile, your family history is short, your portfolio needs breathing room, your spouse can create a coordinated bridge, your IRA withdrawals are costing you more than you realize, or your trust in future full benefits is not strong enough to justify 8 more years of waiting, then filing at 6 the 2nd of May be exactly the intelligent move. Not because you are scared, not because you are desperate, because you understood the machine. And in retirement, understanding the machine is worth a great deal more than winning an argument about the biggest monthly check.